Hello and welcome. In this class, we'll explore how RouterOS is going to manage the ARP protocol. When RouterOS is receiving frames or sending frames to devices that are directly connected to it or in the same broadcast domain, it's going to keep track of those IPs and also the MAC address, similarly to what happens in all the operating systems. For example, you are using Windows, there is an ARP table that is going to remember for sometimes the information or mapping information for IPs and MACs. The same thing is going to happen in RouterOS, and we can check the table simply by going to IP and then ARP. So you can see that this table now has three entries. One is 172.16.255.1, and we can see the MAC address for that entry. We can see the IP 3.198, that's one of the PCs that we used in the previous class, and then 3.199, so that's the second PC. There are some fields that are required to have that ARP table. Obviously, we must have an IP address. We must have a MAC address because that's the whole point of ARP, that we are mapping IPs and MAC addresses. But additionally, we need to know the interface. Because, for example, if this router needs to send a frame to that IP, it's going to look for that information here in that table, and it's going to send a frame out of the interface Ether3. If the router is trying to send a frame to an IP that is not here in that ARP table, then it's going to use the request and it's going to get the reply back from those clients, and then it's going to add that entry here to that table. By default, those entries are dynamic. So you can see here on the flags that is dynamic. That means that if those devices are not sending traffic, basically we have some idle devices in the network, after 5 minutes, that router is going to remove that entry. If in the future the router needs to send frames to those IPs, then it's going to use the ARP request and reply messages again. So that's how the router is going to keep track of that information. If we have a new device trying to send traffic, then the traffic will be managed by the router, and the router is going to have here the IP and the MAC address for that new device. So let's see, just by adding a new device here to my GNS3 topology, I will simply add a new VPC that is going to be connected here on Ether3 in that switch. And now we can simply get an IP via the HCP. So I will start that device, I will console to it, and we can simply use IP DHCP. So now that device is going to get one IP address from that network, 197, if I send a ping to 8.8.8.8. So that device now has sent traffic to the router, and if we check the router, so let's go back to the router, you can see that the router now has an entry for that device, 3.197, and here we have the MAC address for the device, and it's connected out of interface Ether3. Also, we can see the host name. You can see that's PC8, PC4, PC3. If those interfaces belong to a bridge, also we are going to see that there. We're going to cover bridging in our next section, so you will be more familiar with that concept in the upcoming section. So this is how RouterOS is going to deal with ARP in a dynamic fashion. In our next class, we'll learn how to manage static entries and why in some scenarios that's a recommendation. Thank you, and I see you in our next class.